This world is a lie. Back in 2010, during a period many consider to be the peak of Flash gaming, we had the story of a young boy exploring the mysterious world of his subconscious. This side-scrolling platformer intrigued players with an art style that was simultaneously minimalist and gorgeous, with an entrancing soundtrack that elevated the experience. It was a short game that asked very little of the player, other than to appreciate and contemplate this other world for a brief time. Now regarded as one of the all-time best representations of not only what Flash games could achieve artistically, but as a prime example of how they could boost indie development careers. This game introduced the industry to a new indie heavy hitter that is still making stunning games today. It's an epic success story of how one well-made, polished passion project, no matter what size, can become a breakout hit and endure for a decade. This is the history of the Flash hit Coma, its sequel Neversong, and their creator, Thomas Brush. How's it going, guys? My name's Graham and welcome to Flashlight, the series where I talk about all things Flash related here on the internet. It's funny that one of the smallest games I've ever covered with this series got one of the longest lead-ins, and I think that's really telling about the game as a whole. For such a small, simple package, there's just so much more to be appreciated beyond the surface. Now, to quickly clarify one point, Neversong may sound unfamiliar, but it is likely a project you were already aware of. Marketed as a sequel to the original Coma Flash game, this project was titled Once Upon a Coma until very recently. I'll refer to it as Neversong for the rest of the video, since that has become the official title. For anyone interested in seeing what this full game has become, it is out on Steam now. I will have links down below, you guys can go check it out, pick up a copy for yourselves, and show some support for this great developer. It was a Kickstarter success story from 2 years ago, funded in only 24 hours, and eventually tripling its minimum goal. That's a pretty big leap for someone whose career as a game developer started with only a few games under their belt before finding a unique path to indie success. This video is as much about the series of Coma as it is its creator, Thomas Brush, someone who I think has earned their place alongside other indie titans like Ed McMillan and Jonathan Blow. While combing through different interviews and conversations from the last 10 years, one of the most interesting things about Thomas Brush is his claim that he started making games as someone who had never been a gamer.
I have 3 brothers that always play video games their entire life, and I just sit back and watch. I'd never play them. I never beat one game in my entire life, but I just watch them and get inspired and look at their reactions.
His career has been so fascinating to watch thanks to a continued transparency on his end. Whether it's covering game development topics on his YouTube channel, blog posts and postmortems, or his candidness in every interview, he has become one of my favorite developers to follow for both the games he creates and everything he shares surrounding that creation. Thomas has joked before that he likes to advertise Coma as being his first game, and while one could argue it is his first true game, it's not the first actual game project he shared. Truly, he started with Flash Geometry Wars and the Neverland Apples. One being a straight-up Geometry Wars ripoff, and one being a Peter Pan-themed game where you fly circles around apples. Really, they're just experimentations, getting used to coding, and getting a feel for putting a game out there. They're better than some developers' first attempts, but it's still generally as clunky and basic as you might expect. Really, Thomas was only about 15 years old at the time, so the simplicity of it comes as no real shock. After several years of radio silence on the development front, he suddenly came bursting back onto the scene in 2010 with Coma. An instant success being picked up by publications all over, it was praised from every angle, showered with awards on Newgrounds and other websites, and really becoming an instant classic. Sponsorships are quite common with Flash games, but something that almost never happens is being approached by a publisher. Thomas was able to sell the IP of Coma for $20,000. How crazy is that? A free 20-minute experience selling for 20 grand? Now, lucky for us, he was eventually able to buy back those rights, and that is why we are now getting a proper sequel a full decade later. Dozens, if not hundreds, of mini-platforming Flash game adventures would have come out around the same time. What made Coma so special? Why did it seemingly make such an impact on players and catch the interest of someone who is willing to buy the IP of a game that you can beat in 10 minutes? My theory is based around the very nature of Flash games, their audience, the expectations, and the closeness of author to player that just doesn't exist in larger releases. Historically, they've been very good for 2 things: killing time and gaming on a budget. Either you found yourself on the school computers with 10 minutes to kill, or were at home and didn't feel like booting up a game for some big 2-hour session, then Flash games were a perfect fit. Or you simply didn't have access to consoles or a heavy-duty gaming rig, able to drop $60+ on the newest games, that's also where Flash would shine. As long as you had a semi-stable internet connection, you could load up a game for free and play to your heart's content. Really, Flash still fills that same role today. So what does that history and gaming environment mean for 2010 and Coma? This was a free game that told a complex narrative, had a detailed, atmospheric experience, and explored heavier topics that weren't commonly seen in Flash games. After years of shooting kittens out of cannons or flinging stickmen a million miles into the air, players weren't used to this level of polish, nuance, depth, and storytelling. Someone who had never had access to or taken the time to play a more narrative-heavy game suddenly had a world they could invest in, even if that was extremely brief. To this day, there are plenty of goofy debates as to whether or not video games are art. In the Flash game world, it feels more commonly accepted that a developer could make an experience that is more about the world than the gameplay, but even that took some getting used to. Considering that these games are free, then players are more than willing to at least try it out. Coma came at a time when games like Aether, The Majesty of Colors, and Don't Shit Your Pants were showcasing a new, more mature expression of Flash development. But jokes aside, this was a serious yet accessible game. Players often compare Coma and Limbo, two games in development at the same time coming out pretty close together. They feature silhouetted characters, linear puzzle platforming, surrealist imagery, and even giant spiders. So the comparisons kind of make sense. And while Limbo itself is a cheap-to-buy indie game, it's hard to beat out something totally free. And while there's plenty to love about both, Thomas provided a different audience that same exposure to another side of gaming. Flash can really be a gateway in that regard, helping players learn what genres they like most. Coma spoke to players, and publishers picked up on the talent of a young developer who was able to distill a much larger gaming experience into something much smaller. As Thomas himself put it, Flash titles are the perfect prototype, because a free and open market judges them purely and without apology. Coma had made it through the gauntlet, a glowing success, and proven to Thomas, publishers, and other developers that there was a very real market for this kind of game. Since then, Brush has found success and won plenty more awards with titles like Skinny and Pinstripe. Looking now to the new game, Neversong was conceptualized first as an HD reimagining of the original Coma, before eventually transitioning to being a proper sequel. And while you can find plenty in common with the two, such as characters like John the Jump Roping Girl, or someone that suffers from hypoinflammatory disorder, specific locations like the Redwind Field, or broader concepts like ghostly piano playing, and Bird, your helpful companion, Neversong is built as a standalone experience. While there's no reason to not pick up and play Coma first, it is free after all, Thomas said it's really not necessary. The end of Coma has your character Pete awakening. Neversong begins with your character awakening and entering a world not quite familiar to them. And having played the beginning of the game myself, I think it was really smart to design it in a way that essentially retells that story in a new context and builds on it from there. While Coma has certainly aged in the last 10 years, I love seeing the respect Thomas has for his own work. There is a 90-second Redwind theme song in the original Flash game. It's something he made 10 years ago and didn't feel particularly attached to, but he knew that that mattered to the audience, and he spent 3 weeks reworking that one track for the new game. Too often when an artist remasters their game, movie, or album, they forget what both they and the audience originally loved about it. They've grown, their perspective has changed, and they try to thrust that new point of view on something firmly rooted in the past. This can often be a detriment to the original creation. What I've learned is that if I don't like something about the original Coma, I can't just throw it out. The reason why is that my opinion about why the game is good isn't actually the most important opinion anymore. The most important opinion comes from the audience. You can put the original intention into the game of something that people really loved from the original, so that instead of just removing it outright to satisfy my brain, I will change it slightly and hope it makes me feel a little bit better. Thomas specifically cites hating the janky trampoline section, but instead of reusing it exactly in the manner that he didn't like, he instead has found either new ways to incorporate a trampoline or the feelings of being launched up out of the screen. Since this is a sequel rather than a remaster, it's largely about paying homages to the original game rather than recreating it exactly how we knew it before. I have noticed one of the most substantial changes in Neversong from Coma is the move from searching for your sister to your girlfriend. They say write what you know, so I have to imagine with Thomas recently becoming a father and growing up surrounded by brothers, a change to the girlfriend from sister allowed for a more personal exploration of the potential living nightmare of losing a partner. This game is definitely going to make me cry, isn't it? Looking at old interviews, Thomas claimed he actually had an idea for a sequel to Coma all the way back when he first released that game, but was unable to do it right away while he focused on school in his graphics communication program. In that original Once Upon a Coma Kickstarter pitch, he tells the tale of a renewed interest in the game after his post-Pinstripe burnout. He spent 5 committed years working on that game and nothing else. While I would have been interested to see what a young 19-year-old Thomas would have done with a Coma 2, I'm much more fascinated to see how a more experienced, more mature, creative powerhouse like Thomas can take it to the next level now. Based on what I've seen so far in Neversong, we lucked out in having him wait until he had really refined his style and allowed those ideas to gestate and become more fully formed. While Thomas has been entirely a solo developer in the past, he's really never been a big fan of programming, especially not the amount of time in production it was taking up. So I did want to quickly mention that he is now working with Serenity Forge, aka Eric Coburn, who is handling the programming this time around, so Thomas could instead focus on the art, music, and game design. While Thomas has produced incredible things by himself, I have no doubts that he wouldn't be working with Eric if he didn't trust him to see his vision through fully. One of the strongest qualities of Brush's games have always been their incredible soundtracks. The art alone is incredible and contributes so much to the atmosphere, but it is elevated that much further with his beautiful, melancholy, expressive soundtracks. His Flash game follow-up to Coma, Skinny, won a huge cash prize for Best Audio in the South by Southwest Independent Propeller Awards. I love this excerpt about Pinstripe from a Destructoid review. Hauntingly beautiful, the wistful piano backing complements the frigid landscape perfectly. But the most impressive bit is that both the art and music were made by one person. Oh, and he codes the thing too. It makes perfect sense that Thomas would lean harder on audio this time around, picking a new name, Neversong, that much more effectively communicates the importance of the music to this game and experience. Taking other influences from the Legend of Zelda series, I loved seeing the inclusion of learning songs from the soundtrack and being able to play them back like Ocarina of Time. It just fits so well in this world. Regarding the philosophy of blending audio and visual, I always say in my head, there's no difference between music and the visuals. They are one. Everything about Brush's games are so personal and clearly so well thought out to create the best possible user experience, while never taking shortcuts or doing anything to cheapen the look or feel of the game. But I truly believe that the soundtrack is and always has been the heart of his games. There's a magic that happens when he writes these songs that breathe life into the world in such meaningful and subtle ways. It's actually a shock in hindsight that music has not been a more central theme in his other works. Not only is Neversong the most logical next step in his career, it really is the culmination of everything that came before. The original Coma came strictly from a place of creation and experimentation. It was a time in Brush's career before the numbers, analytics, and marketing mattered. The return to this series was born from a desire to return to a more simplistic, creativity-driven form of development. Creating something for the sake of creating, it is truly a beautiful thing, and that certainly was the case for Coma. This combination of following up an indie darling a decade later, struggling to create under the weight of his massive 5-year project Pinstripe, working with a new programmer, expanding his repertoire, and leaning further into the musical elements than ever before, I think really orchestrates the perfect crescendo of Thomas Brush's career, and I think we are in store for what is likely to be his best creation yet. Neversong is out now. I'm so excited for it. I'll have links down below where you guys can go check it out for yourself. Maybe you think about revisiting Coma and his other early Flash games while you're at it. And hey, maybe while you're busy checking out things, you take a look around this channel, maybe specifically at some other installments of Flashlight. Thank you to all the patrons of the channel. Your support means so much to me. I can really relate to Thomas's desires to have creative independence, and that support on Patreon is a huge step towards having that. Thank you all so much for watching. In the end cards of this video, I'll have a link to my own Coma and Neversong playthroughs, as well as a playlist of Flashlight videos, and I hope to see you again soon.